that was like an image I was getting is like how if something happens to you and then you become the monster, you could internalize your role as the monster. And like,
Mm.
I've been doing a lot of like I've been researching nervous system regulation and identity work and like self-concept stuff through like law of assumption and all this because I just have been really fascinated by it. And you know me, I've got to have a rabbit hole to dig into always. Um, but like the ego, like things that we create our identity around. I also just like added a bunch of like thinkers into the book. So I've been like diving into a lot of like Plato, Socrates. I just
Mm.
edited Seneca today. But I've been just really diving into a lot of like stoicism and like deep thought and I just think like she's a really good example of something like that. Just like the idea of like your identity being wrapped around something so much that even if it's a negative thing, like I struggle sometimes with an identity around lack mindset, right? And so sometimes it can be really hard to accept that you are worthy of making more money or like doing something bigger because of this like lack mindset that has formed your identity. And like sometimes it's scary to let go of something that's become your identity, even if it's not something you want. And I think like this idea of really internalizing the role of a monster,
Mm.
like, do you get what I'm trying to say? I think
Yeah, yeah.
I'm pulling in too
You
many
you
things
make
at
a
this
lot of
point, but
sense. And
okay, good.
it's like also being eaten by that identity, right? Because Scylla's
Correct.
out here
Right.
eating the
Like
sailors,
it's
and it's
so
like
literal.
she's also eating herself. Like she is now
Right.
just the monster. Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Sielheiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology.
I'm Lori Kaufman, an astrologer, tarot reader, writer, and teacher. I co-lead the Asteroid Special Interest Research Group for NCGR, an astrology organization, and I offer all different sorts of readings, online and in person.
I'm Alicia Sielheiser, an astrologer, herbalist, and witch living in Oregon on Kalapuya land, and I offer astrology consultations and teachings aimed at helping you honor your most authentic self and trust your intuition. Hi, everyone. We recorded an episode about Scylla and Charybdis and wanted to share a quick content warning before you listen to this episode that we do talk about sexual assault and sexual violence in this episode. And so, if that's something that you find particularly activating, there's no need to listen to this episode, or maybe take some time to really ground yourself and feel where you are in your body and in space and time before you listen to this episode. We talk about some themes related to the Epstein Files as well. So it is a bit heavier of an episode, but there's a lot of really juicy material about ways that we can use our anger and our monstrous qualities to enact change and to fight against the way that we continue to hurt other people when we're hurt. But yeah, we do talk about trauma and sexual assault in a way that is heavy for some. So just wanted to give you a heads up before you listen to this episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Conversations with the Planets. And today we're going to be talking about the asteroids and mythology surrounding Scylla and Charybdis, which are two rocks between Greece and Italy that had famously very dangerous waters. And so there's quite a bit of evocative imagery and mythology surrounding these rocks and these mythical beings from Greek mythology. And if you're unfamiliar with working with asteroids, we do have an Asteroids 101 episode. So I would recommend you pause this and go listen to that so you kind of just understand what the asteroids even are. And then, yeah, we're just going to kind of dig in to some of the stories and mythology surrounding these beings and how they can show up in different birth charts. And
Yeah.
we also pulled the transit chart for Scylla right before starting, and it's actually a Scylla Kazemi right now with Scylla 1 minute from the sun. And we did
Yeah.
not elect this time. We were just like, oh, should we talk about Scylla today? So
Yeah.
she wanted to be heard.
She did. Yeah, well, and I'm in the S's now in my editing, and so I just edited her the other day, and I knew she was close to the sun because I looked her up by transit, and I've been just thinking about how her themes really seem to be playing out in the world right now anyway, and I was just curious how prominent she was in the sky, and I did see that she was just a few degrees from the sun, but when we talked about actually making a recording on her and like doing more with her, I did not realize that she was going to be 1 minute from the sun when we started this episode. So I really thought that was striking how she showed up like that. And Charybdis is in Capricorn right now. She's actually conjunct my Scylla, which is interesting,
Hmm.
on my descendant. But she's conjunct transit Juno. She's not really doing much. She's
It's
just
like
in
opposite
Capricorn.
Jupiter and
But
Cancer, but just yeah.
yeah,
The
opposite
Silica
Jupiter.
Zemi is, which also I feel like
That was
even in the
striking.
mythology, it's like I feel like Scylla comes up more than Charybdo. Like Charybdo almost
Hmm.
feels like a like an addendum to Scylla a lot of times, which would be an interesting thing
Yeah.
to even unpack if you do have a prominent Charybdo in your chart, if you ever like feel like you're kind of added on to a bigger story ever or any sort of experiences like that.
Yeah, that would be kind of interesting to look at. I think about that a lot with pairings when you
Hmm.
see like oh, what are their names? Remus and
Romulus and Remus.
Romulus. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like Romulus has an asteroid and like is so prominent and shows up in so many different ways, but then like Remus doesn't. He's just
Interesting. Except in
there.
Harry Potter, it's like literally Remus Lupin is
Mm.
so in that way he's actually bigger because there I don't think there's any Romulus in Harry Potter, but
Oh, interesting. I don't know much about Harry Potter, but
yeah.
yeah.
Well, he's
Um,
a werewolf, so
okay. Well,
yeah.
fair. But yeah, I do think it's interesting when you see these pairings and one of them became, like Romulus went on to build Rome and Remus
Mm-hmm.
dies. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, it is interesting when one becomes so much bigger than the other.
it is. Yeah, and then just to share a bit of the mythology around these beings,
Hmm.
Scylla is said to have been a nymph, and actually in a little bit, I'll read some passages from Madeline Miller's Circe that depict Scylla's transformation. But
Hmm.
she was said to be a really beautiful sea nymph. And then, as myth is always, there's multiple different stories and none are right or wrong. They all just reflect who the storyteller is and, what pieces feel
Yeah.
significant or prominent in that time. But one of the common threads of Scylla's mythology is that Circe is jealous of her because Glaucus, who Circe is in love with,
Yeah.
Glaucus is in love with Scylla and asks her to marry him. And so Circe turns Scylla into this horrible sea creature. And so then, you see her show up in the Odyssey very prominently. She has 6 heads and like the body of a dog and she barks like a dog. And sometimes she's also
Hmm.
said to be the daughter of Hecate. So there's some like dog
Hmm.
imagery there as well. And when sailors would sail past Scylla and Charybdo, Scylla's head would come out and she had 6 heads, so she would take 6 of their sailors and then they'd, sail past really quickly so she wouldn't have time to take 6 more. Um, and Odysseus does lose 6 of his sailors to them. And
Yeah.
actually, I was reading through some passages from the Odyssey this morning where they depict Scylla, and Circe is warning Odysseus that him and his sailors will have to pass Scylla on their journey right after they pass the sirens. And
Hmm.
Odysseus asks if there's a way to avoid losing his men to Scylla. And Circe is like, you can't beat the deathless gods. Like you can't beat your faith, like your fate, like that
Yeah.
you will lose then to Scylla. There's no way to beat the deathless gods, which I feel like that's something to also sit with if you're having a Scylla transit or you have Scylla in your chart, is sometimes you just kind of have to submit to
Yeah, to the
when
loss. Yeah, to
yeah,
the
to the
things that are
loss.
taken out. Well, and between Scylla and Charybdis is like it's a quote, it's a saying now, and it basically means
Mm,
like there's you have two choices and you're gonna lose either way. Like it's like pick your poison kind of thing, or like
like between a rock and a hard place.
yeah, I was just gonna say that. It literally
Mm,
is just like which, you can make your choice, but either way you have to give something up, or either way it's going
mm,
to be difficult.
yeah.
I also think it's really interesting. Something that I started doing with the book too is adding what their names mean, or like the etymology behind their
Mm,
names, because I've just kind of become a etymology nerd by accident now. I think it's fascinating, and
mm-hmm,
they're always named something so literal to what their story is, and I think the
mm-hmm,
Greeks were very funny to do that in the way that they did.
mm-hmm,
It happens with other pantheons, but the Greeks really like lean into it. But Scylla's name actually translates into to tear or to rend or to snatch.
mm,
So, like, literally, like, snatching up these other, these people that are just trying to, like, make their way, like, minding their own business, moving past,
mm-hmm.
but they can't,
You're being
basically.
snatched up. Like, and
Yeah.
where in your life, if you're in a Scylla transit or you have Scylla
Yeah.
prominent, where do you feel like you're just snatched up? Or maybe you're the
Yeah.
one doing the snatching.
Right. Right. Yeah, because it could definitely go either way, I think.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and then some other pieces about her mythology is the Argonauts actually successfully crossed Scylla without losing any men, and that's because Hera had Thetis guide them through, and so they were able to pass without losing any men. And then Hercules is said to have slain Scylla.
Mhm.
So different
Yeah.
ways that she shows up. But maybe I'll read the passage because I think the way
Hmm.
she shows up in her story with Circe is quite interesting. And this book is fantastic. I highly recommend it. Madeline Miller does a really good job of
Yeah.
really bringing myth to life. And yeah, it's just beautiful. But this is right after Scylla comes to Circe and lets her know, because Scylla knows Circe's in love with Glaucus, and Scylla like laughingly makes fun of the fact that Glaucus asked her to marry him, and makes fun of like how he has fins and he's ugly. And then Circe goes to Glaucus and asks him if he means to marry Scylla, and he says, "Is she not the most perfect creature you have ever seen? Her ankles are so small and delicate, like the sweetest doe in the forest. The river gods are enraged that she favors me, and I hear even Apollo is jealous." And then Circe's like, "I can love you
Mm.
better. You should be with me." And Glaucus scorns her and says no. And so then Circe's like grieving that. And
Yeah.
she's thinking, beautiful Scylla, dainty doe Scylla, Scylla with her viper heart. It was not love. I had seen the sneer in her eyes when she spoke of his flippers. Perhaps it was because she loved my sister and brother who scorned me. Perhaps it was because her father was a nothing river and her mother a shark faced sea nymph, and she liked the thought of taking something from the daughter of the sun. It did not matter. All I knew was that I hated her, for I was like any dull ass who has ever loved someone who loved another. I thought, if only she were gone, it would change everything. I left my father's halls. It was the time between the sun setting and my pale aunt's rise. There was no one to see me. I gathered those flowers of true being and brought them to the cove where it was said Scylla bathed each day. I broke their stems and emptied their white sap drop by drop into the waters. She would not be able to hide her adder malice any more. All her ugliness would be revealed, her eyebrows would thicken, her hair would turn dull, and her nose would grow long and snouted. The halls would echo with her furious screams, and the great gods would come to whip me. But I would welcome them, for every lash upon my skin would be only further proof to Glaucus of my love. And then Scylla does bathe in the magic herbs from Circe, And then on the next page, there's a depiction of Selene, the moon goddess,
Mhm.
describing how she has now seen Scylla transformed. And
Yeah.
what Selene says is a leg, she said, a hideous leg, like a squid's, boneless and covered in slime. It burst from her belly, and another burst beside it, and more until there were 12 all dangling from her. That was only the beginning. She was bucking, her shoulders writhing. Her skin turned gray and her neck began to stretch. From it tore five new heads, each filled with gaping teeth. And all the while, she was baying and howling, barking like a pack of wild dogs. It was a relief when she finally dove beneath the waves. And amidst this, all of the gods are laughing and making fun of Scylla and showing kind of how fickle they are and how they had all liked her when she was a beautiful nymph. And now they're just so entertained that she has been turned into this hideous monster.
Yeah.
Um, and it was Circe. It was Circe's magic, her
Yeah.
pharmacopoeia that had caused her to turn into this monster to show her true nature, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually a really good leeway into something else I kind of wanted to bring up with this story. Um, is just like this idea of women's jealousy that shows
Mm-hmm.
up a lot in all of myth, of course. And like, we've had long conversations about how the people who had the ability to write and record and keep these stories alive were often rich white men in power. So more often than not, the women are going to be betrayed, Freudian
Mm-hmm.
slip. They're going to be portrayed as jealous and angry, and that's been something I've really been thinking about a lot and reflecting on. I don't really participate much in pop culture
Mm-hmm.
in the world. And I don't really watch TV or anything, but I've my nail girl made me watch Desperate Housewives, and I have been watching it and just realizing that such a trope of like early 2000s TV shows were just like blaming each other, like the women blaming each other for everything, no matter what. And like
Mm-hmm.
the men were actually the ones who were the problems, but like they just every single time they found a way to like blame themselves or blame another woman, or just like that seems to be such a theme. And then like themes of jealousy just like show up a lot, and there's actually several versions of Scylla's story, and that's what reminded me of this. And like this has just been on my mind a lot because I'm realizing this was such a trope, and every few episodes of this show like has been like this. And I'm remembering when I was a kid and used to watch TV in the early 2000s, like this was so ingrained in us, in our
Mm-hmm.
society, and I just have forgotten that because I don't watch TV as an adult. But I've just been thinking about it so much because there's multiple versions of Scylla's story of how she became a monster. And there's also a version where Hera actually turns her into a
Mm.
monster to punish her because she rejected a divine lover. And, like Hera's always
Just
punishing
so
people
jealous.
in myth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I mean, Hera's a whole episode that we should
Yes.
do talking
Yeah.
about jealousy
Well, and breastfeeding as
and
well,
yeah, well,
because I
and
have
so many
Hera
other
on my
things.
ascendant, and it's been fascinating to think about like Hera's milk as I become like a breastfeeding mother.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other
Yeah.
episode.
There's so many other things. But yeah, like something that really came up for me, and like I'm just bringing this up because I edited her last week and spent a whole day almost like journaling about this, and just like I made TikToks about it. I just have been thinking
You
about it.
edited
So
Scylla last week, right? Not
Scylla.
Hera. Yeah, okay.
Yes, correct.
Back to
Um,
Scylla.
we're back to Scylla. But just like thinking about Hera's jealousy that shows up
Hmm.
again and again and again and again, and then like Circe getting angry and turning her into a monster. And it's just like there's all these themes of women getting mad at each other and turning them into monsters. And like there's so many stories of Athena doing this. And like
Hmm.
just there, you see this again and again as like women being a victim of betrayal, but being turned into a monster because of other women too. And it's like, well, what actually happened? It just always like opens this story up to
Yeah.
like what's actually going on. And it does feel like, with the whole Epstein Files thing, like I've been seeing some of it on TikTok and I'm not fully following the situation, but I did think it was really interesting. Some of the parallels I've been seeing because it feels like there's been a few women who are getting pretty blamed for it, and none of the
Hmm.
men involved seem to be getting any sort of punishment for what they're doing. And like a big theme that I felt like came up a lot was like desire creating a monster and
Mm.
like unwanted attention towards you, feeling like a punishment that ends up reshaping your entire identity. And, like trigger warning for all of this stuff, but it's just like how many of us have felt those themes of like somebody else's inability to listen to your own boundaries
Hmm.
being pushed on you, and then you end up looking like the monster or you end up turning into the monster. And I just was thinking about how her being in somebody's chart could really feel that way,
Hmm.
like feeling pushed into a monster because somebody else was jealous
Hmm.
of you, right? Like of something you didn't even mean to do, or of something that like, especially if you look at the Cersei story, like she didn't mean for Glaucus to love her. And
Yeah, she
it's
didn't
just
ask for that. And
she
she's
didn't ask for
petty
that.
by making fun of Cersei because Cersei's like an
Sure.
outcast among the gods. And
Right.
she mentions how Scylla gets along with Cersei's siblings who are very cruel to her. And so
Yeah.
Scylla is in this depiction, she is quite petty, but she absolutely
Right.
did
But
not
there's
ask
other
for the attention of Glaukos.
Correct. And there's other depictions where she's not
Uh-huh.
petty too. So it's like, of course, everybody can have their own opinions of which version that you resonate with personally.
Yeah.
Um,
And that is just part of the beauty of myth is that there's
right.
multiple
There's so
different
many
iterations to
interpretations.
find like meaning for yourself. It's not like this is historically correct. This is like
Right.
Scylla was turned into a sea monster. Like it's obviously all just like
Right.
pieces that come out of our subconscious through story and then we make meaning out of
Yeah.
it. And that's why myth is so beautiful. But
Yeah, but it's such an interesting thing to think about is just like, this idea of like trauma freezing your identity and your
mhm,
identity like literally revolving around something that happened to you.
mhm,
And like, I ended up looking her up in certain people's charts too that I knew, or yeah, like just people who have been attacked or like pushed into having to set boundaries, pushed into having to be a
mhm.
monster or whatever you want to call it. Just like, but this idea of like the unwanted attention turning into a punishment.
Yeah.
And then your identity being totally shifted because of something that happened to you that you didn't even choose. I
Mhm,
think that's such a huge theme that like so many women have experienced at some point or another.
mhm,
And just like, yeah, like, and then having to have endurance to push through it and like having to like still just like be this monster and show up every day.
mhm,
Yeah, it's like the idea that like survival just like requires some sort of sacrifice.
mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Scylla can definitely I think we'll put a trigger warning at the beginning of this episode because
Yeah,
Scylla does
for sure.
it can definitely come up with themes of sexual assault and just really difficult experiences in that way. And what also is really coming through with me is the way that, like in the passage, I just read the way that all the other gods immediately abandon her when she's turned into a monster. And they're all like laughing
Correct.
and
Right.
making fun of her. And there's even a passage a little bit later, like a few lines after where I stopped reading Selene's depiction of her because Selene talks about her howling like a dog, and then one of the gods is like, "Oh yeah, she always was a bitch," and
Right.
that is our culture is really quick to abandon and blame victims of all genders from
Right.
sexual assault as well. Because
For
I live in
sure.
Oregon and there's Pacific Office Automation is this big company that had this huge scandal last year where the boss was sexually assaulting a lot of men at parties. And I think that's something that's important to also highlight too is that like everyone can be a victim of
Hmm.
sexual violence, and especially like being left behind and not supported by others in that, which I think can be really, really
Hmm.
common for men, where there's even more stigma around it. Um,
Yeah.
so,
Well, yeah, and kind of like different, but kind of related. Like I was thinking about her also being like labeled as being too much or being too
mm-hmm,
dangerous or too emotional or like too big or whatever you want to say. Um, and I feel like that can kind of filter into that too, because often like when people are being too much, they are more likely to not get believed
mm-hmm,
when something does happen, or when they are speaking their truth. And so, I think there's a lot to be said about like having this like really incredible ability to continue to show up and continue to endure and to survive and go through these like impossible or difficult situations and then like still come out on the other end. But like you don't just come out and look how you did before and you're
mm-hmm.
like, yay, I'm here. Like it's, we've been talking about this with Anana a lot lately and just like all these other characters of just like having to give up and sacrifice so much of who you are. And then coming back around and being like, oh, I'm totally changed now. Like there's no going back
Yeah,
to this
you're
old version of
irrevocably,
you.
and we all
Right.
go through that at different points in our life. But
Yeah, like the
especially the
wake up
ways that
calls and
traumas can just irrevocably shape you and bring
yeah.
out the monster within, which can also, I mean, I have Venus in Scorpio, so I'm like, monsters can be beautiful, but they really can be. And, like Scylla's so powerful, and the way that she's like a sea monster, sea goddess, and like the ocean will like eat
Yeah.
you up, especially like ocean meets rocks will just eat you up. But like, isn't it just so
Yes.
beautiful to go to the coast and see the way that the ocean crashes against the rocks? And there's this coastal line near me called the Devil's Punch Bowl near Yachats
Hmm.
in the Oregon coast. That's just terrifying, terrifying. But it's just like these beautiful churning waves and rocks and how they interact with each other. And the fact that Scylla does survive, and then it's like,
Right.
we also we Jason Holly is like a great mentor and teacher to us both, and he talks a lot about the zodiac as a circle of animals and our
Hmm.
birth charts as an ecosystem. And when you're in an ecosystem, like some parts of yourself or some placements in your chart might want to eat other parts, right? And like the predators and the prey all have places. And so like, where is it that you might have monsters in your chart, or like the predators who are eating, and like they still need to eat, right? Like the wolves,
Right.
Scylla is connected with dog imagery as well. Like they need to
Yeah.
eat too. And so it's like finding a place for all of these pieces of our psyche to be able to exist
Yeah.
and be allowed to exist, and being able to honor the parts of ourselves that either we may find uglier or society might find uglier, but like they still
Right.
matter and they still deserve to have a
Right.
place within like the broader ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, and like even on the other extreme of that, even if you're like the most beautiful person in the planet, whatever, like there's still so much to be said about like beauty being punished.
Mm-hmm.
And like this idea that like I think her transformation like truly reflects how society punishes like what it desires, but because there's so much desire, there's fear. And
Mm-hmm.
like I think Demetra does a good job of talking about that in the Mysteries of the Dark Moon book, and especially when she's talking about like the new moon phases and how like people fear feminine power. People fear the darkness. People fear things that they don't quite understand, especially if they're unwilling to do the shadow work or sit in the dark or
Mm-hmm.
go take the underworld journey or whatever it is, right? And just like being a victim of that, like just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, like being punished because of your beauty, or being overly sexualized or a scapegoat or like punished for like beauty or visibility or
Mm-hmm.
like I think all of those things can be a big part of Scylla as well. Um, and just like yeah, like just or like being on the other end of it, like because you were punished, you could punish others. Like you
Hmm.
could turn around
The
and like
way that we
be
like
the
charge trauma into others, right? Like
yes.
hurt people hurt people.
Yes, and
Yeah.
there's a How I Met Your Mother episode called The Chain of Screaming that kind of makes that joke, and it's like it just kind of shows like the CEO like yells at his employee, and then like the employee yells at like a lower employee, and then that employee
Mm-hmm.
like yells at like the main character, and then like he yells at the guy making him a sandwich at the whatever on his lunch break, and then the sandwich guy goes home and yells at his wife, and then his wife yells at her kid, and then the kid yells at his friend, and it just shows how like when one person at the top has a bad day and takes it out on somebody, it can just spiral down and affect
Hmm.
everybody involved. And like, I just that show did a really good job of like pointing out things like that and just like
Hmm.
really like making fun of them, but also it's just like, oh, that's so true. And I kind of thought about that too while I was editing her. That was like an image I was getting is like how if something happens to you and then you become the monster, you could internalize your role as the monster. And like, I've been doing a lot of like I've been researching nervous system regulation and identity work and like self-concept stuff through like law of assumption and all this because I just have been really fascinated by it. And you know me, I've got to have a rabbit hole to dig into always. But like the ego, like things that we create our identity around. I also just like added a bunch of like thinkers into the book. So I've been like diving into a lot of like Plato, Socrates. I just
Mm.
edited Seneca today. But I've been just really diving into a lot of like stoicism and like deep thought and I just think like she's a really good example of something like that. Just like the idea of like your identity being wrapped around something so much that even if it's a negative thing, like I struggle sometimes with an identity around lack mindset, right? And so sometimes it can be really hard to accept that you are worthy of making more money or like doing something bigger because of this like lack mindset that has formed your identity. And like sometimes it's scary to let go of something that's become your identity, even if it's not something you want. And I think like this idea of really internalizing the role of a monster,
Mm.
like, do you get what I'm trying to say? I think
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
I'm pulling in too many
You
things
make
at
a
this
lot of
point, but
sense. And
okay, good.
it's like also being eaten by that identity, right? Because Scylla's
Correct.
out here
Right.
eating the
Like
sailors,
it's
and it's
so
like
literal.
she's also eating herself. Like she is now
Right.
just the monster.
Yeah.
Um,
And the more that she eats people and pulls people into it, it's like reiterating her role as this monster when like that wasn't her identity at the beginning of her story.
mhm,
So it's very fascinating since I've been doing this research to watch how certain people in real life and in these myths like just take on identities as like we internalize them so
mhm.
deeply and then sometimes it's so hard to separate yourself from this like one thing that your identity has become when in reality it could be like having lots of identities and it's like harder
Yeah,
to manifest or to like allow things to change in your life if you're so strongly connected to an identity.
yeah. And then also the way that um like female and feminine energy is expected to be two-dimensional. So Scylla goes from being
Right.
just like this beautiful nymph to this horrible monster, and there's no space for her to be like a
Right.
contradictory, multiplicitous being. Like she's either or,
Correct.
and the way
Right.
we can just be kind of flattened. Um,
And that's so many women in Greek myth too, is like
mhm,
you're either this beautiful little nymph who has no opinions and like things just happen to her and like she, like and it's the story of Persephone. It's the story of like all of them, right? Like it's the
mhm,
core goddess or Kore. She like literally didn't even have a name. Like her name was goddess. Like she just was. And then
mhm,
she transforms when she has something evil happen to her. And that's just so many stories is like you're either good or bad as a woman. And if you're bad, you're a monster that has multiple heads and eats people. Like there's just
Mhm.
like so little room for in between. And I've been like, we've kind of talked about this. I entered a 10th house perfection year, and that's where my moon is. And it's an Aries perfection year for me. And I have a mutual reception between my moon Mars. So I've just been getting really angry and like worked up about like
Mhm.
women being mistreated. And especially like this book is not helping because I'm spending
Yeah.
all day every day researching and editing this. But like, yeah, I think this is just, but it's so important to talk about. And I think
Uh-huh.
Scylla is such a good way to have this conversation and just be like, look, like there's so much more than
Hmm.
just this beautiful little like innocent thing that isn't allowed to speak or the monster that eats people.
Hmm. Totally. And also, like, I'm working on reading Women Who Run with Wolves by Clarissa
Mhm.
Pinkola Estes, which is an incredible book all about like rewilding ourselves and connecting with the wild woman archetype and like the deep power that comes from feminine intuition.
Mhm.
And that is feeling like a really strong medicine and antidote to these
Yes.
patterns that we're highlighting here. So I would invite people to either read that book or revisit that book, if this talk is bringing things up for you. And, we're really in a time of like reclaiming our power, and
Mhm.
resisting against like misogyny and harm against women and the ways that we just continually keep hurting each other. And the way that Cersei herself is a woman hurting another woman,
Yeah.
um, where there is actually like when we open up to our curiosity and our power and our intuition and we like listen to ourselves and our complexities, there's a lot of power that can come through with that.
Yeah.
And also the fact that, again, Scylla has dog imagery associated with her, and the way that wolves
Mhm.
are these, incredibly wild, powerful creatures who have been almost eradicated, just like, mankind has tried to eradicate the wild woman archetype, but you can't get rid of us entirely. So, there
Yeah.
is hope, and connecting with wolf imagery is something that also feels really relevant to the Scylla archetype and the Scylla like mythology and asteroid story as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I found my note too on the idiom between Scylla and Charybdis.
Mm,
Um, but what I wrote basically is just that it represents a situation where you're forced to choose between two similarly dangerous situations. And I do think it's really interesting that they almost always choose Scylla because Charybdis is like you either all survive or none survive. So it's like a very all or nothing. Whereas like Scylla, you're gonna lose a few men, like you
mm,
have to sacrifice something, but like most of you are going to be okay. Like you're like the ship as a whole is probably going to survive.
mm,
Um, but it's like so rare that anybody makes it out alive with Charybdis that it's just like not worthy to take that chance. And so I think that's another reason why she kind of gets not chosen is just like
mm-hmm,
it's so much more extreme. And like there's just this idea of like, Charybdis being like everything just goes straight to ruin. Like when she transits, maybe there's just a full I've been thinking about the metaphor too of like fire, like a fire burning down, let's say, for sake of this metaphor, like a forest. And like, but then that creates the space for new trees to grow or
mm-hmm,
new life to grow. And you need that sometimes. You need that fire to wipe out everything. It's part of the ecosystem,
mm-hmm,
right? Like it needs that to survive, to rebuild. But it becomes really unhealthy actually when you just hold on to things and you don't allow any change. But
yeah,
this is kind of like like Charybdis is just such a transformational and like hit quick change almost. It's like it's an all or nothing kind of change. It's not
mm,
just like oh, I might lose a few men. It's like, oh, you're like everything is burnt down and then you rise from the ashes almost.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it's like the very destructive side of the feminine anger. And I was thinking a lot about like the womb and the whirlpool, like, because she's a whirlpool, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
literally, it's just this like
Scylla is, yeah.
tornado. Yeah. And it's just, you can't escape the tornado. Like, if
Mm-hmm.
it's coming towards you, it's coming towards you.
But
And
then I'm
there's
also getting
just,
imagery of like, because there's also hurricanes, right? And then you can have the
hmm
eye of the hurricane where if you
right.
like
The
really
calmness
embrace
in the
it
middle.
and you're in the middle, you're actually safe until the
Yeah,
hurricane
and
moves. But
I might be totally making this up, but I feel like there was a story I found of somebody choosing Charybdis and like ending up in the eye of the hurricane, basically like the very middle of the whirlpool and like surviving it or like
Hmm,
somehow making it through. Like that, I think that is like there's a story like that.
yeah,
I don't know if it was like
maybe. Well, now there definitely is because you've spoken it out. So
yeah, oh, now there is. But I feel like I came across that somewhere.
in your research,
It just,
okay.
yeah, it just like sounds familiar. It might have just been
Hmm.
somebody's.
Maybe it was in a dream. Who knows?
Yeah, literally that happens a lot too, so who knows? But
Yeah.
yeah, just, and I think with both of them too, there's this idea of surrender. And I think we talked about that too when we did some of the tarot episodes, because that's kind of how I see the Hanged Man, and
Hmm.
then that being the card before death is just like, death isn't the scary part. The Hanged Man is when you have to hang upside down and have the Anana descent and get rid of the things that you thought you wanted and just allow the things
Hmm.
to leave yourself, leave your life. And yeah,
Yeah. And then, like, what do we need to shed now in like
right.
this culture that does perpetuate sexual assault and harm against women, and where we're
Mhm.
harming each other and turning ourselves into monsters and hurt people, hurting people? Like, there's so much that needs to be shed and burned to the ground and completely wiped out so that we can grow anew. And it makes me think of especially forests in Montana, that
Hmm.
some trees germinate in the heat of a fire. Like they can only germinate because of the fire. And so the fire is also part of the ecosystem and can lead to
Yeah.
incredibly creative, generative, new growth. But, as we enter with, Neptune and Aries, and right now, while we're recording this, Saturn is at the very end of Pisces. By the time this is released, Saturn will also be in Aries.
Yeah.
We're entering this new, very fiery period. And it's like there's a lot of like righteous anger that needs to come through to burn things down so that we can build
Hmm.
new things in their place.
Yeah. Yeah. And like just allowing, I think there's just so much to be said about allowing it to rebuild. And I think that's also going to be like a big thing we see in the next couple years with Pluto and Aquarius and just like people starting to stand up and no longer put up with this stuff. And that's why like because the sun is towards the end of Aquarius right now. Um, and I think as we're about to exit Aquarius season and the planets are starting to move into Pisces and we're no longer having a five planets in Aquarius moment. Um, it was really interesting to see like how much is coming out and how much is being revealed. And it's like before all these crazy transits we're about to experience. But then when I saw Scylla was conjunct the sun, it was like, well, yeah, of course. Like it just felt like, of course she's there. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
like all these things are just getting wiped out so
Yeah.
strong.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Scylla is co-present with Pluto, and it's like, what does Scylla in
Right.
Aquarius, think the fact that
Mhm.
like we're right now we're kind of mouthpieces for Scylla as she's conjunct the sun, and we're recording this podcast, and I feel like a
Yeah.
lot of what we've been saying is very Aquarian of thinking of the collective and kind of intellectualizing cultural norms and how we
Yeah.
relate to each other. Um, so yeah, but
Yeah. Yeah. And like, the feminine starting to stand up more, especially with
mhm.
like what's coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, well, do you have anything else to say before we wrap up this episode?
I think that was all I had. Did you have anything
Okay.
else?
No, I think we gave Scylla some good time and um yeah, so thanks for listening and maybe if any of this has brought up anything particularly heavy or activating for you, I just invite you to take a few deep breaths, feel your feet on the ground, feel your tailbone, feel yourself connected to the earth that's holding you, maybe ground yourself in the environment around you, like what day and time it is. You're not living your previous traumas. You're right here. I hope you're safe. So just grounding yourself in your surroundings, taking some deep breaths and noticing if there's anything you need to tend to for yourself or for others. And thank you for taking the time to be with us and, explore this mythology with us. And as always, we love, hearing from folks. If you have Scylla in your chart or you've experienced a Scylla transit, if you want to comment or reach out or in, any way
Yeah.
share those stories, we
Please
do love
share. We
hearing
love
from
it.
people. Yeah. And we'll be back soon with more asteroid stories as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any personal stories to share or thoughts and reflections about what we discussed in this episode, please comment down below or reach out to us on Instagram. And please come follow us on Instagram at ConversationsWPlanets, where we share forecasts and updates about the astrological movements happening in the sky, as well as updates about our episodes. The link to our Instagram is in the show notes down below.